Hello, and welcome to the virtual AWP Conference and Book Fair. I am Regina Brooks, a member of the AWP Board of Directors. For accessibility, I'd like to offer a physical description of myself. I'm an African-American woman with brown skin and long, curly, dark brown hair. I have almond-shaped eyes, and I'm wearing a gold floral dress with pearl drop earrings. We are delighted to bring you this event today and are thrilled that you are here. Before we introduce our featured presenters, I'd like to acknowledge and thank National Book Critics Circle, sponsors of today's event. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. And thank you to all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. This event was pre-recorded and is premiering on March 5th from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Central Time. After the conclusion of this event, it will be available for on-demand viewing. This event is being live captioned through StreamText. Please find the link to access StreamText from your browser in the event description. A transcript of the event will also be available for on-demand viewing. During the live event, please feel free to post comments in the platform's chat box to the right of the video. If you are watching on demand, feel free to continue to leave comments in the chat box. On behalf of the AWP board, thank you so much for joining us today and your continued support. And please be sure to spread the word.
Welcome all. I'm Jane Chabatori, Vice President of the National Book Critics Circle. My specialty is awards and events like this one. Thanks so much for coming to our literary reading tonight. I'd like to send out a toast to all the writers and teachers of writing and students of writing out there. Now more than ever, we need stories and storytellers. We're going to spend the next hour focused on the theme of finding home, which is particularly resonant this year in a time of dislocation, loss, and separation. And it's a theme shared by the two NBCC award winners who honor us with their presence this evening, who both write eloquently about home in all its dimensions. I want to express our gratitude to Edwidge Danticat, whose story collection, Everything Inside, won this year's NBCC Fiction Award, and who, by the way, is the author of a memoir, Brother, I'm Dying, that also won the NBCC Award a few years back, and to Sarah Broom, author of the Yellow House, which won this year's NBCC John Leonard Award for Best First Book. The Leonard Award, by the way, is named after one of our founders. A word about the NBCC and our awards. The National Book Critics Circle was founded in 1974 by a group of literary folk who wanted to expand the conversation beyond the Algonquin Hotel in New York City into a national conversation about books. Our awards are among the most intensively vetted literary awards around. Our 30-some finalists and awardees are selected each year by a 24-member board after a year-long process that involves a nomination and conversation. In December of each year, we winnow our nominees down to long lists of 10 in each category of 6. We vote on 5 finalists in January. This last January, we spent 6 hours on Zoom and came up with our finalist list. In March, after another 6-hour Zoom meeting, we'll announce this year's finalists. As you know, critics are critical. We're opinionated. We don't always agree. Sometimes it seems like we don't often agree, but it takes a long time. By the time we narrow our choices down, our 30-some finalists are the best writers publishing today in English. Writers like these extraordinary two we have with us this evening. We'll be announcing this year's winner on March 25th. I hope you save that date and join us. It's free and you can come. All you have to do is register. To do that, you can go to our website, bookcritics.org. You can learn there about how to sign up for the awards ceremony and find out who the finalists are. You can also learn about our Emerging Critics program, our diversity work, our new awards and fellowship fund. You can sign up for our free weekly critical notes, or you can join. You can become a member as a student, for instance, for $15. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our readers and our moderator. First up is Sarah Broom, whose memoir, by the way, The Yellow House, also won the National Book Award for Nonfiction, as well as our John Leonard Award. A native Orleanian, Sarah received her master's in journalism from UC Berkeley. She's been awarded a Whiting Foundation Creative Nonfiction Grant and fellowships at Jurassic and MacDowell. She lives in Harlem. Reading next is Edwidge Danticat, born in Haiti. Edwidge is the author of Breath, Eyes, Memory, an Oprah Book Club selection, Crick Crack, a National Book Award finalist, The Farming of Bones, The Dew Breaker, Create Dangerously, Claire of the Sea Light, and Brother, I'm Dying, the memoir that won our award. She will be reading from her newly honored story collection, Everything Inside. Our moderator is NBCC board member Marian Winnick, a University of Baltimore professor, and the author of The Big Book of the Dead, winner of the 2019 Towson Prize for Literature. She reviews for People, Newsday, The Washington Post, Kirkus Reviews, and hosts the Weekly Reader podcast, the WYPR. So here to start us off is Sarah Broom.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to read from a section called Hiding Places, which is my first experience of the Yellow House. I am 5. This small bathroom where my father sat on the toilet after work and died, and where before then, Mom took baths with green rubbing alcohol and Epsom salts to eat the weariness, is for me a playroom full of things no adult ever touches. The sheetrock leaning against the wall, smelling of mold, is my chalkboard, and the neon green lizards crawling in and out through holes in the screens, my students. Standing on 2 bricks lifts me high enough to see out onto the alleyway running behind our house and over the fence that separates where I live from where my friend Kendra lives in the trailer park next door. Careful when coming down that my lavender jelly sandaled foot does not step into the medium-sized hole in the floorboard that will eventually become a large hole, letting in more sound and outside creatures. After this was the room where Daddy went quiet. It was a room with the washboard in the tub and then an actual washing machine. But Mom says the plumbing was never right. Those plastic white tubes, contorted limbs twisting through exposed walls are still here for me to look at, but the machines are not. The tub is gone too. There is still a heavy door that closes with a hole for a knob where I have stuffed tissue paper for privacy. I like best to hear the voices in the house calling for me and not being able to find me where I am here, where I can wait anything out until the night. The other bathroom is in the second half of the house, in the add-on that Daddy started but never finished, next to the den with the wood frame TV my height, where the Flintstones and Jetsons live. Everyone uses this new bathroom just beyond the girls' room that is pink and mine, since I am a girl too. This bathroom is the only room in the house with a lock. I take full advantage of this, especially when I want to get away from my big brother Troy, whose nerves are always bad. His right ear points, and I fixate on it. The more his leg shakes when he sits watching football, the madder I can make him. I'll get up close to his arrow-shaped ear and yell, ear, 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 to rile him up. And sure enough, he, a 17-year-old boy, will chase me through the house from front to back, from the living room, through mom's room, through the kitchen and the girls' room where I sleep, and into the second bathroom. That's why you ear, I'll yell from behind its locked door. And since Troy will wait a long time outside it, saying, wait till you come out, little girl, you gon' see, you gon' see. I memorize the rooms and sides, learning right then and there the geography of hiding. The second bathroom is also where I take my baths. The whole time I'm in the tub, Mom is asking me whether anyone ever touched me down there in my privates. I don't care who it is. It could be your brother, your sister, your uncle, your cousin, your daddy, whoever. If anyone ever touches you down there, you make sure to let me know right away. That is your and only your privates. She tells me this nearly every time my body touches the water. When my big sister Lynette is sharing bathwater with me, she hears it too. Mom's voice when she is worried has the same girlish sound as it does when she's entertained by whatever small thing I am finding hilarious. Your daddy, whoever. But I don't have a daddy, I think but never say. It takes a long time for me to know why I don't have a daddy, but I am the babiest, I am told, last and smallest. Babies don't need to understand. Thank you.
Oh, so beautiful. um, thank you. This is such a pleasure to be doing this with Sarah. I want to thank everyone from National Book Critics Circle, Jane and Marion for bringing us all together. I'm going to read from a short story called Without Inspection. Without inspection, or entry without inspection, is a legal term in immigration that if someone has come to the United States and has not seen an immigration official, they're considered to be here without inspection. And it is as if they're not here at all. I mean, and legally. When I first heard that term, I thought I wanted to build a whole story around it. I wanted to be a love story. So this is a story about a man who comes by boat to the United States, becomes a construction worker and falls in love with a woman, and then one day falls out of the sky without inspection. It took Arnold 6.5 seconds to fall 500 feet. When the 6.5 seconds of his free fall were over, his body slammed into the drum of the cement mixer. He was being tossed inside a dark blender full of grout, and every few seconds, his face would emerge from under the wet, pounded sand and pebbles, and he would keep his mouth closed while trying to force air through his nose and push away the grainy mix that his body was trying to inhale. He pretended that he was swimming, just as he had when the speedboat stopped in the middle of the ocean and he was told by the boat captain to swim ashore. He attempted arm strokes, but couldn't move either his arms or his legs. Still, his body was in constant motion because the mixer continued to turn. He tried to reach out for the shaft. What in a more stable place? What in a holier place? In a home, in a house, or a temple, or some other holy place you might call a potomitan, a middle pillar. He felt lighter now, even lighter than he had been when falling. His bones were melting, his blood evaporating, and he was now like parchment or something porous, tulle or the white eyelet lace that his beloved adored. He had not been paying attention to the alternating hum and jangle of the mixer. He hadn't noticed that there were streaks of blood polluting the cement, or that he was feeling absolutely no pain. Then the mixture stopped spinning and he heard the stillness, which was soon replaced by screams and grunts and, oh my God. Then he heard the sirens, which took him back to the beach, to the gray sand and Darlene's sable face. From where he was lying in the cement mixer, he saw an airplane cut across the clear blue sky. And that was when he realized that he was dying, and that his dying offered him a kind of freedom that he had never had before. Whatever he thought about, he could see in front of him. Whatever he wanted, he could have, except what he wanted most of all, which was not to die. He had wished for something with wings to pluck him out of the cement mixer. And there it was now up in the sky in the shape of an airplane. He and Darlene had been putting money away to take their son on an airplane. It was either a trip or a ring, and they were essentially already married, Darlene had told him. Their son was their ring. They loved each other and they loved him. He wanted to see Darlene at Paris again, if only one last time. He wanted to see their faces. He wanted to hold their hands. He wanted to kiss them in the different ways he often had, her on the lips and him on the top of his head, where his fontanelle would be if he were still a baby. The airplane in the sky was slipping out of view, and he heard himself whisper, "Restez là, wait." He meant to tell the airplane to stay, and to tell Darlene and Paris to stay, to always stay in his mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those wonderful readings, Sarah and Edwidge. I just wanted to start the conversation about home by asking Edwidge, so you began your life in Haiti, have lived a long time in the US, and have treated the idea of home both in your memoirs and through the characters in your fiction. And and a range of characters in Everything Inside. Can you talk about the way that your personal sense of home fuels writing about home for the characters in the book?
Well, thank you. For me, I think because I left a home like Haiti, the place that I thought I would always be when I was 12, from that moment on, I thought like home was something you could take with you. I think that the notion of home lost the idea of permanence for me. And of course, also because I'd had family members who had to suddenly leave during the dictatorship, it just felt like home can also be always taken away. So my mother had something that she used to say. She, when we talked about home, like, people would ask, where is your home? She would question herself, and I think preparing us and sort of our questioning, but leaning us more towards wanting to embrace where we had come from. But she would always say, is home the place where you were born, where your lombrite, like your umbilical cord, is buried, or is home the place where you die, where you are buried? And I've always thought that in between those two is home, in the 100 Years of Solitude, there's that where the wife of the colonel says, I don't want, we can't leave because you don't belong to somewhere until you have someone under the ground. So, I think between birth and death, there's so many definitions of home. Also, this idea that we don't always get to choose home, right? We see that in immigration today, even today. Like today, there are 3 deportations flights to Haiti. And some of these people thought they were home. So I think more than ever, it's that amorphous idea of home is something that I try more and more to kind of explore fully in the work that I'm doing.
Sarah, I imagine that this idea of home being something you can or sometimes even have to take with you is probably resonant for you, since the home that you write about, the Yellow House, exists now only in the book, The Yellow House. And in a way that I was thinking that book is like your home now because home is in there. But I just wondered if you want to respond to this idea of the portable home.
Sure. I mean, this moment is in fact a bit of home for me, being in conversation with Edwidge, who has been her work has been a guiding light for me. And in my own work in the Yellow House, which I hope is one of many things, I don't know that it could have existed if the house still existed, if you understand what I mean, because it was in fact the absence of the house that brought for me the questions that I then sought to answer ultimately. Initially I was just interested in, why did the house haunt me? And having come from a culture where we are deeply ritualized and care a lot about the ground and place and what is speaking to us, right? From beyond what we can see. This book, I think, was a search to create some kind of structure that could never quite imitate what home might mean, right? And I think especially having come not just from Black culture, where we know the history and we know what happened in Reconstruction and we know what the soil can actually signify, but having come from this particular mother and grandmother, these maternal figures who cared so much about finding groundedness where there was none. And I think what Edwidge was, her reading really spoke to me, because this idea that she made something out of this sort of legalese, right? And I think so much of the Yellow House came out of my mother feeling annoyed and agitated that she had been labeled an unlawful issue on her birth certificate in 1941, and trying in my own work to think about what home might mean for a Black American woman who has been described by the state as an unlawful issue.
So I guess in memoir, it's clear that in memoir there can be a really strong, personal drive to recreate what has been taken away from us, and to both places and people. To, as I said, now the Yellow House is the book, The Yellow House. I was sort of trying to ask in the first question, Edwidge, is how do you think yourself into, it's about creating characters, I guess, and all the characters in everything inside have, this really fraught relationship to home, because they're all in some sort of transit and dislocation. And how does that, tell us a little bit about the process of creating those characters and their homes?
Well, I mean, I was so just home and house, right? As Sarah was speaking, I was thinking of this lecture, this residence that Toni Morrison did at the Louvre, and she called The Foreigner's Home. And this idea of rememory, right? And I think of the Yellow House as a kind of like such an active and like vibrant manifestation of that notion of rememory, and characters inhabit that too, and I mean, ideally in fiction, they don't really exist, right? But they embody like all these bits of memory, and memory, as I understood it, the way Toni Morrison described it, was just like the house is no longer physically there, but somewhere it exists. Like, like Sarah, even if she hadn't written her book, it would still exist, but we wouldn't have access to it. Like maybe only the people who had been in the house had access to it. So I think that the characters are also that way, right? People we know, people who have passed on. So I try to borrow, especially in this book, I wanted to do, all the stories I think are about love. And there are these people who are sort of carrying bits of people, bits of places in them. It sounds lofty, and when you sit down to write, you're like, I just want to get this person through a story. But when you put the different stories together, it creates a kind of home. The book becomes a kind of home for these characters. And I've often had that with my stories, because my books are sometimes disjointed, where I'm like, I would so love these people to get together. I would so love to have a party for all of them. You know, like Alice Walker said in the Color Purple at the end, where she thanks the characters for coming. And I was like, I would just love to have one big home where they all are, because they are so many different people in so many different places to me, and sort of the recreation and the fiction of it.
I love that idea that, you know, that everything exists in some other plane, and that it's sort of the writer's job to, you know, bring these things down onto the page, and so we can experience them, whether it's the actual lived past or it's something, you know, made up. They're all sort of out there and for us to grab. Both of you have homes that have been really strong, affected by natural disasters. And right now we're kind of living through some sort of natural disaster. I wonder if you can talk about the way it feels to have these things happen to your home. You want to talk about Katrina a little bit, Sarah?
Not really, but
You don't have to then.
but you know, I think for me, there's always a distinction I make between what is natural and what is official negligence. And so in the case of Katrina, the storm itself, we would have all been drinking beer and, you know, moving on with our lives. I think what the evidence shows is that what exacerbated the storm itself was in fact the official negligence, the levees being underbuilt, being mishandled, the long gestating inequity about where certain people live and the care taken about where they live. And these unnatural disasters are the thing that I think even now preoccupy me. And you know, it still happens where someone will say, well, why do you have a house there, right? I mean, why would you build there, right? And these are the questions that are only asked of certain communities. You know, no one is going around saying, why are we living on a fault line in certain places in America, right? So these sort of anti-Black, racialized responses are what really interest me. And I also, though, and this is something, you know, Edwidge just talking about a book as a house, and and then also mentioning Toni Morrison made me think so much about the way that Morrison, for instance, gave me a set of tools to not just talk about those unnatural disasters, but to in fact just actually tell the story that of these people who I knew and saw, whose lives were so much bigger than that particular unnatural disaster, who had magic. That magic was something I worked very hard to create in a nonfiction work, and did a lot of reporting to uncover the fact that I called the house by its number, 4121 Wilson, on the first page over and over. That is Toni Morrison teaching me, showing me how you create worlds that have nothing to do with anything beyond the life lived within that world. And so, yeah, so I'm, you know, I was being a bit facetious about not wanting to talk about Katrina, but it really is because I find it to be a minor note in the actual story of this family of New Orleans today and New Orleans yesterday and probably New Orleans 200 years from now.
Yeah, I thought a lot of 124 was spiteful on the first page of your book, but it's fascinating the way what you were saying about sort of where people build, because we have this same conversation about Haiti during the earthquake as well, because it was a natural disaster, but one was so much made worse by the fact that people have had to build in precarious places on hillsides. And then soon after went back to building that way because they have no choice. Mm-hmm. And I remember doing Katrina. Katrina was the summer of my first bunch of earthquakes because I just moved to Miami, and mm-hmm. there were a couple before Katrina that sort of hit us here, but Katrina not so badly. But I was watching New Orleans, and all we kept hearing, first of all, the fact that people who had been there for generations were being called refugees. And then, the reporters kept saying things like, this is not Haiti, this is not the Congo. Like they kept making sort of these comparisons that they, that this week is also being made, with what's happening in Washington. But it was, and it was so bizarre to me that even in disaster, right, that they were, that this was the presentation of that. And I felt, there's an incredible ties between Haiti and New Orleans, but this one I thought like was being made in this such a degrading way to both places, really. Mm-hmm. And like, so I wrote something about called Another Country, and both the Baldwin and Zora Neale Hurston talking about, with the hurricane in there, I was watching God. But I thought that's one of the ways too that the larger story is untold, right? Because there's like these blanket statements made that just erases everybody and erases the pain and the long history that leads to a moment that is called a natural disaster, but it's a very long series of also unnatural disasters.
And I mean, it's interesting because you do this in all of your work, really, right? It's like how to tell the stories of these individuals who are within a certain history. This is all sort of Brother, I'm Dying, it always comes to mind, right? It's telling the story of these lives within the history that's happening within and without. And who, that seems like a challenging thing, especially in this country, in this culture, because it seems like the natural disaster is code word for the moment when certain people started paying attention, mm-hmm. the media moment notice things. And that's very separate from a long story. And the people who sort of have inhabited that story for really long periods of time.
Mm-hmm. And I think what I find myself, we try to resist is that impulse, even in characters, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, to be like, I'm writing this to show you that I'm a human being, right? Like I'm writing to respond. Right. And I think, that just takes away sort of the energy of it. It's not even writing to explain, it's writing to say like, to say who we are. And that's, I think that's so important to resist. And that, so for me, one way I do that in terms of home, I know that there are younger people in my family, like there will be in your family, who will never know this notion of home, who will never know certain people who are pillars of the family, who are like the griot, who are the historians. So I always think I'm writing this for them, I'm writing this for them at least, or at least, tow it with them in mind, so that other thing is easier to resist, especially if there's a barrage of these comparisons, of these types of attacks to your humanity.
I love that. I feel the same way. Because if I think of it as about, this is for my nieces and nephews, of whom I have about 50 or so, right? These people who don't know the history of this area of New Orleans, even though many of them lived there, who don't know who our great grandmother was, or, you know, for them to have this sort of collated story of the place. And I think too about, I'm very sensitive to any sort of cut off place, you know, any place that is under talked about. I think that was my attraction to Burundi, you know, like how could this place be next to Rwanda, one of the more well-known places on earth, for its tragedy, and no one have heard of it, you know? I'm so drawn to those places, but I think you're right that trying very hard to simply tell the story without always having the eye on you, or without thinking that you have to explain something, you know, without writing a sociology of a place. I mean,
It doesn't keep it from being read that way anyway, right? But
that's true.
yeah, but I think it's like the intent.
Right, that's
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
It seems like, in a way, one thing that's being gestured at is that home is in time as well as in geography. You know, in fact, very much so. You know, our home is defined by when as much as where. And for example, you can leave a place, you can be in a place very briefly when you're young and go away and never go back there and still feel, you know, that this is your home. And also you can walk into a place you've never been before and, you know, and feel like that, suddenly have this feeling that you're home. And, you know, I think that maybe one thing is that this idea of home being so one thing is not right. You know, it's multiple things and it's on multiple planes. That wasn't really a question, but do you feel like, what are other places? Is there other places that seem to you to be home besides the place that you're ostensibly from?
Well, you know, I'm in Miami right now, and I consider this home, and I think part of that has a lot to do with the fact that both my daughters were born here. And so I feel in a way that I have like a permanent tie to it in that sense. There's a little house where there's a midwife where they were born, and that I imagine them sometimes like giving like the younger people in the family tours and say, oh, this is where I was born. So there's that, sometimes the precision to the home, and certainly geography for sure, because we find ourselves a lot when I'm in Haiti with my girls to say, oh, this is where I went to school, and my husband going, this is where I played soccer. And I always pause in the moment that you're sort of showing a trail to home. But less and less, you know, especially in this moment when we have access, we have less access to like physical travel, right? And to getting to places. The idea of home is even the idea of home is something to wrestle with, right? Like, and you feel like, okay, now when I can travel again, what's the first place I'll go to? And in some ways, and I think I keep thinking to my brothers in New York, that's the first, you know, that's where my nieces are, that we haven't seen them in a year. So that idea also, it's like the urgency of the moment is also pressing, you know, to like what would be the first place I would go, and is that, you know, and if I had to choose in this moment, like another year of quarantine, where would I go? So I don't know. I think there's a lot of home thinking, like of home going, like, and you think of all the trips you wanted to make and you haven't made, and so I think that definitely travel and geography for sure. This notion of home, like, you know.
Have you been able to? Do you feel like you're home in Harlem now, Sarah?
You know, Harlem has always been a home, a kind of home for me from the first moment it's just so Southern, and I know there's been gentrification, but it's still this very Southern and Southern feeling, and people sit on their stoops and say hello and good morning, and I know all of my neighbors, and you know, it feels very different. I've lived downtown, you know, no place is like Harlem for me. It's the energy and the people and their outfits and the way they put sentences together. But I was just saying that I have this longing for New Orleans still, because there's something about the temperature, you know, how humid it is, the water and the heat, and I miss the people so deeply, you know, really deeply, just random people, you know, New Orleanians, you know, and the way we sort of are with each other. In, you know, in a very small space. I mean, New Orleans has a max population, I think it's maybe 450,000. That's pretty tiny. It's got the village feel going, you know? So it feels like a place I'm always drawn to, but I think home for me is a more existential condition now. And I can be home very quickly, depending on my mood and what I need. And I know now, and maybe that's the gift my mother gave me, was to know how to make home very quickly and to feel grounded and to feel surrounded. That's now home for me. If I can feel surrounded and grounded, then I'm home. And that's just something I'm learning, you know, now, I think.
I think that's an extraordinary gift, and one that I feel like I would love to give my girls. That sense of just being able to create home, because I think it makes you a little more resilient, really, in life, and being able to make that home or find a home. Because you know, when you were talking about New Orleans, for me, there's a place with my mother-in-law in the south of Haiti, where you go in the river in the afternoon. I think, like, I long for that as a, you know, we think, you know, as a different spots of home, but I think to in terms of survivability, you know, for younger people, that's something that it's extraordinary if you can create that home. And isn't it amazing? I think when you were talking about Harlem, it makes me miss New York too, but how people can make you feel at home as well.
Really.
And it yeah. And it gives you it makes you feel, you know, I remember when we moved into this house in Little Haiti, my neighbor came over, we had an avocado tree in the yard. She came over and she said, well, we had like a rundown gate. She said, before we could just come in through the gate and get some avocados, but y'all are getting in the way of that. And so my husband was like, come get your avocados whenever you want. And then then it was obviously that we had, you know, that she wanted to meet us, and they became very, you know, she passed away this year, unfortunately, but she was 80 years old, the first person we met here, and she took us around like Haitian style, introduced us to all the neighbors, and made us feel really at home. And it makes you think of it's something that I've tried to do when I can, like that somebody else has that ability to really welcome you into their space with, you know, and make you feel at home in that way. It's a very powerful thing.
And hearing you talk, it reminds me too of language and what can happen when we not only see each other, but somehow hear each other as humans. And that has something to do with our work too, right? And I mean, I keep thinking of the moment when I went to Cambodia for the first time. I was like a baby, and I was doing a job in Hong Kong and at time, and I was back then, they had like stringer people, and the big white guys in the office wrote the stories, and then there were the people like me who got sent off to various places to report. And I had become obsessed with the history of the Khmer Rouge and everything that had happened. And so somehow I ended up in Cambodia with a photographer, and knowing no Khmer, now I think back on it, I'm like, how the hell did I make it? What was happening? But what I remember are the family I was living with and the fish soup that they had ready when I showed up. And the way, and I remember in that moment, for a long time, Cambodia felt like home to me. It was, and I went back recently and it still has that feeling, but it's all because of the people, how they are, how they embraced me, this sort of sense I had while being there. And that was across language, of course. So that there is a way in our constitution of home that language factors in, but not in the literal way.
And
Well,
because it was
people.
food.
Right, yeah, the food, there you go.
And it hit to some of that New Orleans in you.
Yeah, it's like, wait, this is like a fish gumbo. I get it. I get it.
But cooking food is one of the ways that we, well, talking earlier about taking your home with you. That's, when we take the food that we eat in this other place, that's the way we keep it with us. Talking about people being home, it is also, that is just as much true as the where and the when is the who. And I know that there's people that you can be with them and you will always feel home you're at home if you're with this person. I mean, I feel that about my children. And now they're kind of flung around the country, but I can be home. They don't have to come home. I just have to be with them. I was thinking about how not home also plays a role for writers. Like sometimes it's important to not be home so that you can see something about it. And I was thinking about, you've been to some writer residencies, haven't you, Sarah? And I wonder if writers' residencies are more about like making a home at this place or about not home, about the distance.
That's really an interesting question. I think not home is an interesting geography because it drums up discomfort for me. And I think discomfort is useful when you're trying to interrogate something, an idea maybe. I'm thinking a lot about this these days because I'm very interested in the idea of wandering. As someone who wandered quite a bit, and thinks of myself as a wanderer, a bit of a wanderer, to be uncomfortable in an elsewhere, and to be sort of stripped down without the touchstones that and have to sort of make something in that, from that position, feels complex to me. But the residencies were different because, the social aspects I was never very good at, because I just wanted to be in my cabin doing whatever I was there to do, right? The true Capricorn, it's like, I don't want to have dinner with the group. I don't want to talk. So I think that was sort of a different scene for me. I like the ones where you just went off and, you were left alone and you didn't have to really talk to anyone.
What one is like that?
I don't remember very many. That was sort of the problem. So I don't know that I'm cut out for I'm also deeply superstitious. If I'm working on something, I really don't want to talk about it. I don't want to have any thoughts out of my mouth about it. I just want, if I'm writing, like the Yellow House for forever, I was saying to people, I'm writing about a house. I'm writing about a house. And they were like, are you serious? So I think residencies force you into this place where you are talking about the thing you're trying to make, which feels unnatural for me personally.
Do you feel that way too, Edwidge, or are you okay with talking about what you're working on?
Oh no, I was raising my hand for like the Capricorn.
Are you a Capricorn?
I'm a Capricorn, but on the cusp, like January 19.
Beautiful.
But yeah, I've only been to one residency, and that was before I had kids. It's probably my separation anxiety from having my parents away when I was little, but I hate to leave my kids. So if they have a residency, we can bring 2 kids. Go. But I'm superstitious too. I don't even like to show my stuff until I'm done. Because I had one experience like very early on where I showed someone something and they're like, what do you know about this? And I felt like it killed the idea for me. So I like to finish before I show. I don't like to talk too much about it. I like to just have the thing set in my mind. And and I think I find like residencies though are great because you're outside of your life, like your actual life. But the socializing would be hard for me too. Yeah.
Well, I am impressed by both of you with the patience that you have to, let the thing evolve without, showing anyone. I'm so opposite of that. I could barely, write 2 pages without having to get some sort of feedback or something. But
do you have a trusted group, or do you get the feedback from the same people?
I don't have like a group, but I have friends, my sister. It's not really like, I'm not even really trying to get, feedback. I don't really need my sister to say anything much, it just somehow writing, like both of you seem to be like sort of the iconic writer that, works in isolation and needs that brain state, that not isolation, like not people, but your creative process happens in a room alone. And
for Edwidge, what happens? Like you write the whole thing and then you send it to a friend?
No, I do what Annie Lamott eloquently called a shady first draft. And then I just get it, like I revise the hell out of it by myself. And then I'll send it, like when I'm ready to go out, I'll send it to my editor, Robin Desser, who I've worked with for many, many years, or to my agent, Nicole. But I hate to put people close to me, like in this position of having to be like, oh, it's nice. Like, for me, that's the fear.
I hope my sister isn't watching this, she's going to say, I be more like her.
And then have to eat dinner with them. Like,
I know. Yeah. Nice is not what you want to hear.
Yeah. So I think that's why I was asking if you have someone, if you have someone you trust. I think if you have like trusted people, you know who are going to be brutally honest. And I have a good friend who would be brutally honest, but I wouldn't be able to recover from her honesty. So I'm kind of in between. So what is it like for you, Sarah? Do you have a group or?
No, I have the opposite of a group. I guess I have no group. I have many friends who I love, admire, who are so thoughtful, but I actually want to be slightly less staunch about this because I think I just feel like I'm working out the idea, and it's really, really hard to give someone something that hasn't been revised and revised and revised and revised so that I know the thing I'm thinking. So, it's interesting because in the nonfiction world with the Yellow House, for instance, the proposal I submitted, I never looked at again. It's sort of like, how do you do that, right? You sort of you know, what proposal was submitted for? I can think of so many great books, you know, like what proposal was submitted for, you know, I should think of something brilliant, but you know, like there are so many books and I always think like, what did that proposal look like, right? It's really hard to separate the process for me. And so I just want to keep my head down and know what it is that I'm thinking. And then somehow when the time is right, appear with the thing, you know?
Yeah.
Because
Same for me.
I love the editing part. That's the part I live for. I'm
Me
like
too.
an editor. You know, I came up at O Magazine under this woman named Pat Towers. And she was like one of the last great editors. And I really learned how to edit and receive editing. And at Berkeley, I worked with Clay Felker, and he was like a brutal, you know, sort of sometimes very mean editor. And that's the part I live for. But it takes me I think I often don't feel that I have the idea firm enough yet,
Mhm.
you know?
And you're finding it out as you're going, right? I think that's where I feel that fragility, right? Like it's kind of like you can be easily distracted or deterred because you're not certain yourself about quite what you're doing. Like for me, like I'm learning what I'm writing about as I'm writing it. So it feels to me a little bit like fragile.
Does it feel the same way for fiction and nonfiction for you, or is there some sort of difference?
Nonfiction is easier to share. I think because it's like it already exists out there. So it's kind of, I think because nonfiction, I'm often trying to figure out the structure, right? Like what you put in, what you take out. But I still want to present people with like the very best I think I can do in the moment. And then sometimes, you know, I've exhausted that process so much that I'm surprised when they have a lot of response. I'm like, but I did it all already. But I try to get it as close to done as I can. You know, like I think I worked with one editor one time who said that I give clean copy. You might recognize it. Yeah.
I think that we've been talking for an hour. It seems like
Wow.
5 minutes to me for some reason, but and I have so many more questions all of a sudden, but it's time for Jane to come back and get us finish us up here. This has been so much fun, and now I want to know so much more, but I didn't get to question number 3 through 75, it looks like, so.
Oh, but you did wonderfully. Thank you.
Yes, thank you,
for
Marianne.
moderating
Thank
us. Yeah.
Here's Jane. Jane, you're muted. Okay.
I'm just unmuting. I'm sort of speechless because I'm reminded of, I'm sharing my daffodils with the wonderful readers today. I bring them to the stage and honor you with them. And Marianne, thank you. I'm reminded of being in graduate school and attending my first AWP and standing in a room. There was the overflow room and listening to Toni Morrison and trying to take notes like this, because I was hearing so many things that seemed so incredibly valuable to, you know, to people who are readers, to people who are writers, who people are aspiring. It's like this has been like a double master class in the art of great literature. So I thank you both. I'm so proud to be involved within an organization that honors your work. I hope people will come to the March 25th award ceremony and sees the next group who will be honoring. Go to bookcritics.org and you could read about who the finalists are. And I wish we could be in the same room, but next time. Okay, guys, you make me understand home in a new way, and I want to go hug my son, you know? And my husband, thank God, is in the other room, so I will go hug him. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you. This was wonderful.
I think I'm gonna have to make some gumbo, actually.
Yeah, I know. Food is no. Food.
I'm gonna make some fish soup.
Oh, I'm
I have
coming over.
flow.
Cambodian fish soup. Do we have a-
I'm sure there's a recipe online.
Oh, yes, there is Cambodian fish soup.
Mm, Okay,
So
that's it.
really great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to
Thank
meet you,
so
sir.
much. Good to meet you, Edwidge. Thank you again,
Next time in person. I
Yes.
hope.
for sure.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you, Jane.
everyone. Bye.